Good afternoon and welcome to Integrate Online. I'm Ranata Hughes, your moderator today. Again, welcome to Integrate Online, presented by the West Virginia University Reed College of Media, which offers renowned online master's degree programs in marketing communications and more. Thank you for joining us. We are so excited to have you with us today. And today we will discuss communicating culture change, part 2. We have the lovely Kayla Reed with us and the wonderful Eric Winkfield today. Please be sure also to everyone, be sure to to mute your microphones and be sure to place your questions down in the chat and we will address those later. So let's get started. Hello, Kayla. Hello, Eric. We will start with Kayla. If you would please introduce yourself and tell us what you do, Kayla.
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone in attendance, and thank you for the invitation to join you today. My name is Kayla Reed. I use the she, her pronouns, and I am an organizer. And my formal title is I'm the executive director of Action St. Louis, which is a racial justice organization that was founded after the Ferguson uprising that took place after the killing of Michael Brown in 2014 here in St. Louis. And I'm also a leader in the movement for Black Lives and help lead the Electoral Justice Project, which is the kind of democracy intervention table of M4BL that has done a lot of work to increase the capacity of Black organizations to utilize tools of democracy toward building power in relationship to the larger movement of our generation. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to be here and excited to dig into this conversation.
Awesome. We're definitely so excited to have you, Kayla. Thank you for being with us today. We also have today the wonderful Eric Winkfield. I know Eric, it's been such a gift to meet Miss Kayla Reed today, but Eric is one who is very familiar with myself, and we share the same alma mater, Florida A&M University. I just haven't been lucky enough yet to move to Morgantown and attend WVU. So we just might get a chance to share the same graduate school as well. Eric, if you would introduce yourself and tell us all the great things you do.
Sure. Thank you much. So good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Winkfield. I am now a vice president at MBooth. I'm heading up the agency's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. MBooth, we are a New York-based PR full-service communications consultancy, focusing on public relations, creative, digital, and consumer communications, as well as corporate communications also. I am also a faculty member, instructor for the Reed College of Media, really focusing on undergraduate students with PR and communications. And I'm excited to be here and join into the conversation that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us, Eric. We're so excited to have you and Kayla, and let's dive into the real good stuff today. So Kayla, let's start with you. What brought you to a point of becoming the co-founder of Action St. Louis?
Yeah, certainly. I am from St. Louis. I grew up in St. Louis. And if you know anything about St. Louis, it's one of the most segregated cities in the United States. So I grew up in North City, which is predominantly Black by virtue of policy and decision-making is where a lot of people, when they migrated north, moved to North City, St. Louis. And so I'm a child of the North Side and, lived a very standard life for someone who was born in St. Louis in the 90s and ended up graduating from Review Gardens High School. And just for context, where that district is in St. Louis County, it is the same district that the apartment complex where Mike Brown was killed. That apartment complex is a part of that school district. And so my neighborhood was Ferguson, right? I lived in the neighboring municipality, and municipalities are these little 6, 7, 10 block neighborhoods that have their own little government, police department, and everything else. And so I was a pharmacy technician in 2014, had done some college and was, moving toward what I thought was a degree in nursing, but was working at the time. And on August 9th, heard the story of Mike Brown. being killed and his body laying on the ground for 4.5 hours in Ferguson, and understood the interaction that a lot of Black people, which will later become national news, had in St. Louis, where they were pulled over, stopped, maybe even harassed by police officers. But the fact that he was killed was something that was really, viscerally shocking to me in my experience of St. Louis at the time. I was 24, and I became a protester. Right, I was one of the people in the Ferguson uprising that happened, and um, used social media to help tell the story of what was going on from the perspective of protesters, and eventually became an organizer for a group called the Organization for Black Struggle, working on issues. So the first campaign I worked on was the Ferguson municipal elections in 2015, where we were able to kind of triple the number. There had only been one Black person on Ferguson City Council in all of its history, and the municipality was 70% Black. And so we got three more people elected to that city council in the kind of immediate aftermath of the uprising, and kept organizing. And what I found, in 2016, I decided to go back to school. So I went back to WashU and have gotten my bachelor's degree in sociology and African American studies, but couldn't quite shake the bug of organizing. Just felt like it was too much opportunity. The ground was too ripe, and that we had so much more to do beyond what I had contributed over the previous 2 years. And so Action St. Louis is really an outgrowth of that. It was the same summer when I went back to school that Philando Castile and Alton Sterling was killed. Philando Castile was from St. Louis. His family still lives here. He's buried here in St. Louis, and just knowing that in St. Louis you could be killed by the police, and if you get out of the city, you could go somewhere else and be killed by the police. It really kept me up, and we decided to build this organization as a space where we could think about intervention, and not just the defense kind, but like power. What does it look like for Black people to determine our futures? What does it look like for us to set policy agendas? What does it look like for the most impacted to have the most say in what this organization does? And have spent the last 5 years building out this organization, from sort of my living room where I am now, and friends, writing on paper, to, now a non-staff team org that works on issues of democracy expansion, housing justice, and anti-carceral solutions. So what does it look like to build, to help electoralize issues around policing and jail closures? And we've worked on a myriad of issues that I'm sure we'll continue to talk about, but really at its core, I became an organizer because I saw an issue that needed to be organized around, which was police violence. And we built an organization to make sure that we had institutional power to contest against those same issues that are still plaguing our communities today.
Thank you for sharing that. Very touching. And of course, my heart beats for St. Louis as well, as I mentioned to you earlier before we started, and to share with everyone. I'm a PR practitioner as well as an educator, and I used to represent the city of St. Louis. I was so lucky to get to do some marketing for the city of St. Louis, and do press tours, lead press tours, and things like that, to get their museums published, and things to make the world feel the heartbeat of St. Louis, and to feel what the city has been through, what they are still going through, and how could we progress out of this with forward thinking. And so I definitely feel you when you express that it's dear to you. St. Louis is definitely dear to me as well. I look forward to someday getting back over there and doing more work. So I'll be collaborating with you about that. Now, Kayla, I would think that just listening to your story, I hear so much passion for what you do. Do you definitely feel that you were born to be this change, not just for the city of St. Louis, but you were born to be the voice of change through integrated marketing?
I think about the space that this country has been in for the last 6 years, and I think all of us were born to be agents of change. It is where we decide
Absolutely.
um, to enact that is a conversation that impacts me, right? That um, what we have witnessed in this country is a reckoning. It's a rupture of a very long racial history, right, that has produced devastating outcomes for Black people in this country. And regardless of where the millennials are the most educated generation, we have experienced upward mobility, right? We also are the generation of extreme student debt, um, and 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 less likely to buy homes than any other generation before us, right? And so, when we think about the state of Black people in this country, for me, that is the reason for all of us to act. And so, this individual action, Mike Brown being killed, nearly 7 years ago, it changed everything about my life, right? And so, um, I do view what Action St. Louis does and the work that I am privileged to do every day, as a part of his legacy, right? The legacy of all those people who took to the streets in 2014, and that uprising in Ferguson has sparked a movement that we saw reach 26 million people in 2020, right? Like every single state, Alaska, Hawaii, DC, Maine, the DC that should be a state, Maine, Florida, every corner of this country protested in 2020, over in defense of Black lives, right? And that Black Lives Matter has become the largest social movement in the history of this country. And in part because people here in this city, in that small suburb in North County where Mike Brown was killed, said we can be change agents. Did we know then how large this movement would grow to? Absolutely not. But I think part of the reason we named the organization Action is because every person can take action toward change. Every person has a responsibility to do so, that we all contribute to making this world and this society safer, more inclusive, and more democratic for the people who come behind us. And that is, that's what I hope to do in the work that I get to do in my lifetime.
Absolutely. Very well said. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Eric, you last year, congratulations, by the way, last year you became the first DE&I lead for M Booth, New York. Now, what led you to this role, first of all, and how are you using this role or walking in this role to lead in diversity and bringing change inside of the office as well as outside of the office?
Sure. One, thank you for that question. And I'm actually want to piggyback off of something that Kayla said when she mentioned that we are all change agents, and it's about how we want to enact that change, right? And so, ever since I was a student studying communications at FAMU, I definitely felt a deep responsibility to be that change agent in the space of communications. Like I'm good at this. I'm good in the space. I'm passionate in the space. But as I began to start to venture off and be in the industry, I quickly noticed that there are very few, close to none, people, like very few people in the industry who look like me. And I struggled with that realization, because there are so many people who look like me who are so talented and deserve to be on different levels in the industry. And so the question that I always ask myself is like, how do I be a part of the change? How do I put myself in the way, in the place of one, helping other folks get to the table, but also helping other folks be at the table and be empowered while they're sitting at the table. But beyond myself, it's like, who do I work with to do that? Because I think so often that we always focus on the I. What can I do? What's my role? But we also sometimes lose sight of the how do we work together collectively, and how do we find a common understanding to really move an initiative and to really enact change. And that is the reason. That's what motivated me to be in this role, because I felt I was going to bring a different level of energy, a different perspective, but more so a point of view that was more inclusive on the people who I bring along, but also how we engage in conversations to really, figure out what is the true issue that's been holding us back for truly adopting and sustaining diversity and inclusion, heavy on the inclusion, and how do we course correct to move towards a direction where we are fostering it, where it's not a standalone, but it's actually integrated in every facet of an organization, particularly at MBOO, but also working with our clients to help them to figure out where they are on their journey and helping them move along as well.
Very well said. Now, I want to ask you, Eric, as a PR marketing, integrated marketing, you do it all basically. As an integrated marketing professional, how do you recommend communicating culture change in a tasteful way, professional, unoffensive way that you could communicate Black Lives Matter, social justice, the whole movement? How could you help grow this movement in a tactful way?
So it's it's an interesting question. And what I'm going to say is that it first takes education at all levels, right? So
Absolutely.
before you can communicate about any community, whether it be Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian American, like whoever, like whatever culture you're trying to reach in your communications or be inclusive of in your thinking, it does require a certain level of awareness and education. You don't have, like, yes, formal training is amazing, but we're in the age of the internet where everything's at our fingertips with Google, but there's so much content out there from different diverse publications that are out there. There's so many resources that are out there to educate yourself on what's happening with groups you're trying to communicate with. Now, the interesting thing is that I don't know if I'll answer the question from tactful and tasteful. I think the more important piece is authentic, because a lot of organizations are struggling with finding where their true authentic voice is in the space and communicating with Black and brown people, particularly Black people. And a lot of their struggle is because the work has not been done internally to make sure that their house is in order before they want to get involved and say something externally. And that's a huge misstep that a lot of folks have made. And we saw it a lot last summer, where a lot of organizations, when the Black Lives Matter movement was revving up, when we saw the killings of George Floyd, the Breonna Taylors and everything, a lot of companies were making statements and putting public commitments out there. But some of those companies realized that their in-house wasn't clean and in order first, and they actually missed a big step. And they not only got, backlash from the African American community about what they have not been done, but they also lost a lot of ground, a lot of trust with their employees as well. So the internal is just as important as the external, but it has to be authentic, and I can't stress authenticity enough as well. Now there's countless of papers, countless research that is out there that speaks to why catering and being specific and acknowledging and embracing and empowering the Black community is good for business, right?
Mm-hmm.
But beyond the good for business, it's just good for our society. There are so many contributions that African Americans have made in our country. The list is boundless. It's literally an abyss of things that we have done as a people. But when you talk about how to communicate and how to really craft messages, it all starts with, what is your intention? Check your intentions first, and then it will begin to shine through and bubble up through the communication. And also be open to feedback. When you ask tough questions, ask the people who are going to give you the real answers. If you're looking for somebody just to green light and check off a mark and move something forward just for the sake of it, then are you really in the business of trying to authentically communicate to the communities of color? And the last thing I would say is just, be open to the changing of times. Kayla and I were talking about earlier how, the movement and the way that you communicate about the movement is different now. Like today with social media and influencers and celebrities and everybody being actively engaged in these conversations, and younger consumers like expecting brands and businesses to have a voice, have a space, and have a position on these issues. It goes back to that brand leader's question, is like, what is our space and how we stand up? Either support, who we support, as well as how we support, is extremely important to think about and be mindful of as well.
Absolutely. Very well said. Kayla, I will ask you the same question. As a PR marketing, integrated marketing professional, how do you recommend communicating culture change and Black Lives Matter, social justice, which is something you definitely stand on the front line of every day, from a nonprofit kind of community standpoint? How do you communicate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I was saying to Eric earlier, communication is one of the strongest tools of any social movement, right? When we think about the ways in which what we have learned about the civil rights movement or the Black Power movement. There are so many examples of how art, culture, communications told the story, showed the politic and the power and the beauty and the dignity of folks fighting for their rights, right? And so, um, as someone who is, I won't call myself a comm specialist. What I will say is like I'm an organizer by trade. Is that my relationship to communications is one of which it utilizes communications as an intervention, right? And so the ability to tell someone's story who is marginalized, the ability to give someone platform who is impacted, the ability to combat dominant narratives about particular groups of folks, those kinds of strategies help to build and sustain movements. The ability that the movement for Black Lives Matter has been able to show you so many different leaders all at once, where folks can see, Patrice Cullors, but they can also see Brittany Packnett, and they can also see, just the many names that have become, household names around movement, shows us the power of communications and communication strategy. Um, I think for me, what we have seen over the last 7 years is that communications is can be used as a tool to amplify movement, and it can also be used as a tool to vilify movement. And so we've seen the ways in which post uprisings, even this in 2020 that happened in Minneapolis and Louisville, how different now the response is to protests that are called Black Lives Matter than they were in 2014 after Ferguson. And that is a direct reaction to and response to communication strategists like you all, right? Folks who have held press's feet to the fire, who have denied access, who have pushed back, who have required headlines to be changed, required narratives to be strengthened, who have made interventions through their relationships, who have gotten op-eds published, documentaries made, to help to demystify and to humanize the demands of people who are dealing with police terror. And so I think about communications as a tool where when whatever space you are in, it is how does this service, not just, in some places it's a client, but when in the nonprofit, it's like, how does this service the people, right? What is this space going to produce a story that helps or that harms? Is this relationship with this particular press, this particular press outlet going to help or harm our space, right? And understanding you as both an amplifier and a gatekeeper, that there are moments where people, Chelsea Fuller, who's an alumni of this university, often is like, we're not going to do that one because I know the questions that they're going to attempt to ask, right? We're going to make sure that you feel prepped around the questions that you may get posed, right? And we're going to use this opportunity to tell our story in a different way. And I've had the privilege of being able to witness how communications can be used as an intervention, and how we've seen, I think of a popular person, someone like Don Lemon, right, who has moved football fields in their reaction to things like Black Lives Matter, to things like the movement for Black Lives. And so I think of communications as a strong tactic. And when you are in relationship to people who do not often have their voice included and who are outside of the status quo, that really communications is both a tool to legitimize, and it's also a tool to help teach, right? That at every opportunity that we get the microphone, we are able to like speak about our work, speak about our values. And we wouldn't have the kind of vastness that we have around this social movement without comm strategists who were thinking about, BLM has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. That's because we've been able to combat the story that we are Black terrorists, that we are violent thugs, that, the things that were said about us 7 years ago. We've been able to combat that narrative to the point where someone's like, we should nominate this social movement for a Nobel Peace Prize. That narrative shift is a direct reflection of comms folks who go to work every day to ensure that the best stories are being told on our behalf and the best voices are being lifted up to advocate for our own stories. And there is nothing, the last thing I'll say is the first training any organizer gets is called the story of self, right? How are we able to tell our own story? How are we able to tell our connective story? How are we able to move people to action? communications is a tool that we all use, and having the expertise of folks like who are on this call, like Eric, and others, it actually allows us to think 30,000 feet in the air about what's possible with that story of self and how powerful those individual stories are. Um, and we've seen that across time. We've seen that whether it's Sabrina Fulton, the mother of Trayvon Martin, and her story and how it has mobilized thousands of folks. And we saw, 60 years ago with Mamie Till, Emmett Till's mother, and how communications was used to help spark the civil rights movement, right? How she used the injustice of her son's killing, to tell a very honest story about what Black people were dealing with in the South, and that mobilized millions of people into action, and ushered in some of the best, most transformative policies we've ever seen. And so that in these stories of pain and in these moments of resistance, so much is possible with the power of storytelling.
Absolutely. I love the way you said that. There's a key word that you said, gatekeepers,
Yeah.
being a gatekeeper. And that just really stood out to me, that we all could be a gatekeeper. And it ties in to a key word that Eric said earlier, and that was authenticity, being, relaying the message authentically, and being a gatekeeper. I love that. I love that. Absolutely love that. So Eric, what soft skills, excuse me, I want you to tell us, what soft skills can communications professionals uh, obtain to help shape their strategy in messaging and communicating culture change? So, of course, we know we all need that passion, and to be authentic with it. But what other soft skills do you definitely think we need to relay a strong message?
I love this question because actually I was going to actually not chime in on something that Kayla said again, but it actually bleeds into this answer. Um, I'm going to raise to the top. The first thing is ethics, right?
Mhm.
So Kayla talked about the competing stories, right? The story of what the BLM movement really is and what folks try to paint the BLM movement to be. And it's really interesting as communicators how loosely we look at our ethics, our code of ethics. So PRSA has a code of ethics. If you have not read it already, please know it, live by it, and please counsel with it. Because I feel like we've gotten a little loose about the code and that standard that we've set for ourselves as communicators. Journalists have their own code of ethics as well, and we do as well. And we have to remain true and solid to who we are as communicators and counsel accordingly, literally no matter the outcome. That is really when you're going to have true, authentic change as well as responsible communications happen. In the last few years, we have gotten very lax about that code and about communicating the truth and pushing back the narrative, especially when it comes to communicating about communities of color and movements that are focused on empowering and embracing communities of color. And it's not right. And we have to get back and go back to the basics and deal with that first so we can begin to course correct and move forward in the right direction. Other soft skills I would say is we have to remain curious. Like, no, in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you will never know it all. You have to be committed to the learning. You have to be committed to growing and understanding. I have to understand Kayla. I have to at least know and be open to hearing Kayla's story, just the same way I have to be open to understanding hearing a Chad story or hearing a Diana story or hearing a Joe story. I'm just looking at the Slack screen panels right now and calling out names. But all of our stories are important when it comes to lifting up and moving us forward when in the space of really being inclusive, because it's through our individual stories where we find some synergies and some power to really build inclusion. And then I'll also say tenacity, because the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is not for the faint of heart. And just even though your title is not head of DE&I or DE&I specialist, does not mean that you do not have no stake in the game in supporting and lifting up the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your own space, whatever you do, whatever your profession is, wherever your company is, or whoever your company is. And then also a piece that is missing so much, and I really want to bring it back up, is empathy as well as love. You cannot move and counsel and coach people if you're coming from a place of hate. It has to come from a place of empathy, one, to understand where they are and help them grow and move where they need to be, but also to really make the impact, it needs to come from a place of love. And we have to move our communications and our tone from a gotcha type of experience to a let's figure this out together. So I can't speak directly to Kayla's space because Kayla, that is your role, that is your space. But when it comes from us as communicators and how we counsel and how we position things, and move our leaders forward, grow our leaders, we have to be able to allow them a sense of give them a sense of empathy. But also at the core of what we do in the space of DE&I, there has to be a foundation of love there for the sake of creating spaces and keeping spaces for people of color, for the people who identify as diverse, for people who identify as LGBTQIA, whatever the categorization is, it needs to be the foundation there so they can fully and authentically come in the space and be embraced while they're there.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add, if I can add something, Renata, around
Oh, sure.
is, a lot of people think about, especially in communications or any position really, when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we think about who works there. I would challenge people to think about diversity, equity, inclusion as who gets to speak, right? Like what stories you are telling. A lot of times what we do is we reinforce the status quo by saying only a communication specialist can come talk to us about culture change. When organizers are put forth culture every day, right? Our rhetoric, a communication specialist didn't come up with Black Lives Matter. They didn't come up with the chants. They didn't come up with the colors. They didn't come up with the campaigns, right? Organizers did that. And what communications folks can do always is put value to folks who are not professionalized into the role, who are not often seen as experts, that we are being inclusive in who gets to state the message, right? Whose story gets to be told. Where are we thinking about interventions and inclusivity in these panels? There's a mayor's race in St. Louis right now, and there was a conversation one of the candidates put up around violence, and every person on the panel was a cis man. And it was alarming to me because I was like, in your lack of inclusivity, you have alienated an entire group of folks who experience violence, right? Women, children. And when our spaces to talk about ideas don't include the folks who are not diverse, then our solutions will be insufficient, right? Our what we produce will not be strong enough because it won't be far reaching because we weren't inclusive in the conception of it when we put it together. And so I just challenge folks that, like, yes, it's about diversity in who we hire, but it's also about diversity in the work. That Black people shouldn't just talk during Black History Month. Women shouldn't just talk during Women's History Month. Trans people shouldn't just talk once trans people are killed. That it shouldn't just be a reaction to be diverse and inclusive. That it should be the intention always when we're walking into the space.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Intentionality is so key, right? Because you can't just tokenize people, right? But like you have to be intentional about who you bring to the table and how you bring them to the table. My CEO tells us all the time in the leadership team, she talks about the how matters. And it's how you go about doing things. And to your point, Kayla, like, communicators, we have to understand how do we bring value and contribute to the conversation and to the work, right? Yes, we are extremely good at what we do, but that's not for us to
absolutely
not for us to hold on and beat our chest. It's for us, like, our role is a role of how we can better serve. And how do we help folks? Like, somebody may have, all the right tools and the things put together. They don't know how to bring it together and make it work as cohesively as possible. And that's what we specialize in.
Yeah.
And that's where we can offer our counsel.
Yeah, I think of strategists in this way as like seamstress, right? Someone may bring you the fabric, somebody may bring you the thread, and you put it together into what is worn and what is seen. But who made the fabric, who wove the fabric, who brought it to the table, those matter, right? And we have to think about putting value to those in ways that often, certain voices get dismissed around how they sound. I think a lot about when I was just a protester. And I would do an interview and someone would be like, oh, you're so well spoken. Right. And it's like, well, who does that leave out when we decide to create a ceiling around education access or around how folks speak? Who does it leave out when we say you have to have a comma and letters behind your name? And what experiences are left out? And then what solutions are left out? Because people close to the problem, people who are interfacing with the problem, often know the solutions, often know what they need, right? We don't have to go get someone who has a PhD in police violence. We talk to the people who are being terrorized by the police. And those those kinds of interventions, they're just so significant. And I know that I'm coming from a particular purview, but I also think about this, I think about this in relationship to like the corporations,
Mhm.
that it's a huge, like we're still at the point where there are too many firsts. I
Yeah.
just saw a headline about the first Black woman CEO of Walgreens,
Yeah.
right? And that we're still in this first. And it's 2021. We can't be at first. We need many, because if we just have one, then we're putting the entire structure of diversity and inclusion on the shoulders of one person. And that's never going to work, which is what we see happening out of Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
that folks are leaving by saying, my work wasn't valued. I was tokenized. And therefore, if you feel tokenized, then your output isn't going to be quality. And we're not going to make the level of interventions we need to make. So I really do. I love communications folks, because there have been many times I've just ideated and watched them take that, like the fairy
Make
godmother and
magic.
Cinderella, and like whip it into this gown, turn this pumpkin into a carriage, and we're off to the races. And I think that's magic, and it's beautiful, and it's so powerful. And when those people when they put value to who gets to tell them the story, who gets to inform their work is even more powerful and impactful.
Well said. I love that. One of my favorite things you just said is communicators and strategists are like seamstress. They put it together, and I'm a seamstress by hobby. And so when you said that, I'm like, oh gosh, that is brilliant. That needs to be in a book. I love that. I absolutely love that. I looked at Eric's face, and he's like, yes, that's what we are. That's what we do. And so, yeah, usually we feed off of the ideas of the community and the ideas. It reminds me of a media tour I was conducting in the city of Detroit once, and this was about 4 years ago. And of course, we spoke with the strategist and the communications director for, the National Museum and this and that. But there's this guy who rode up on a bike. He was homeless, and he stopped and he chatted with us, and what he had to say was valuable. What he had to say was what made the article, and we found that very interesting. He had such passion. As you mentioned, the people in the community know what's going on in the community, and so he was able to relay that message. He was able to explain, what that community had been through and what needed to be done in that community. And so we just stood there and listened to him, and it was pretty amazing. It was amazing. It was a good lesson for all of us on that day regarding, a person's passion, and no matter what their background is, no matter how much money or how little money, no matter what education they do or don't have, like, it's everyone have a life and a message to, a story to relay, is what I'm trying to say. Very good. Oh, this is fantastic. So moving on, how do you communicate? And this is to either of you, or both of you could answer. How do you communicate to different stakeholders? That's the unique thing about this. How do
Yeah.
you communicate to different stakeholders? I recall Eric earlier saying love. I loved that message. We must do it through love, no matter what ethnicity we are collaborating with to push this message, but how do we communicate this? And of course, love conquers all. I love that. How do we push this message of diversity and inclusion to stakeholders? All stakeholders. Of course, we know how we could reach the community. How do we reach investors? How do we reach partners and sponsors for the company, definitely in marketing and PR, in corporate, in the corporate arena, uh, uh, along with Kayla, what you do, dealing with the community most of the time. You have to, I'm sure your organization rides off of investors, financial investors. How do you communicate that message? Either of you could take this.
Yeah, I'll start if you make it. I want to say that, especially in today's climate, it's really interesting because you're seeing a lot of initiatives where boards of companies are taking really aggressive measures to diversify their boards and make sure they do have representation. And so before you communicate, it's about like one identifying where do you stand, and also being really clear about what are the expectations of you, from your employees, but also from your consumers. A lot from your consumers. And so what I'm loving is seeing like my ELC notifications, there's the Executive Leadership Council, their notifications, they're like ringing. Or like this person of color, this black woman has been named to this board, this black man is named to this board, this different companies are naming folks to boards to not just like seat fillers, but like active roles to engage in these boards. But when it comes to like, what do you do and how to communicate, you have to start with the people who are most important. That are the people who are working day in and day out to lift up and support and grow an organization, your employees. And so it's interesting because we talk about the things that, DE&I leaders do, me specifically, like nobody can do the DE&I work alone. And
Mhm.
so you don't know everything. You don't have all the answers. And so it's really keen to make sure you're bringing people to the table that brings different skill sets, but also different perspectives to help you balance off to make sure you are communicating appropriately. So before I got to M Booth, there was already a DE&I committee established at the organization. And these professionals are phenomenal and they are fantastic. And like, honestly, I would not be able to do what I do every day in my role if it were not for that team. Because I don't have all the answers, but they also keep me honest, and they also keep me accountable and the agency accountable in the work that we do. But also, when we talk about how we communicate, they challenge our language, and they challenge, like, did we think about it from this perspective, or did we think about it from that perspective? And that's why, DE&I committees, but more so in like infinity groups, or better yet, business resource groups that are like, your different, like African American ERGs or your Asian American ERGs. Those are so important because they're giving you and give you a really good look of the priorities through their lens, and they help you integrate those in the overall business priorities. You start there. Right. But also, going back to the piece about authenticity and love, is it's all about the intentions. Your intentions will always shine through in a message. And so you have to be really mindful about who's crafting your message, who is helping you hone your message, and and going back to the how are you presenting that message forward?
I love that. Very well said. Very well said. How you're putting the message forward, that means a lot, and it speaks volumes. It How you put it forward, that's what depends on how they receive it, and I love that.
You have to be mindful of your audience, right? So who are you communicating? Like, communications 101. Who am I communicating to? Writing 101. Who am I writing this paper to?
Mhm.
And what is going to resonate or catch their attention? And then how do I bring the key messages and get them to understand and digest what I'm communicating to them easily? And so any stake, whether it be a politician, whether it be an investor who definitely wants to see numbers and money, but also like consumers, whoever it is, like your nonprofits, your philanthropy partners, how are you taking your messaging and making it relevant to who they are and what their focuses are, and then also making sure that it's true to bringing through your true intentions on DE&I through the high message.
Love it. Absolutely love it. It's 12:45. I'd like to get Kayla's take on this. Kayla, if you could really quick give us your take. And I have one or two other questions for the two of you professionals, and we're going to take questions in the chat. So, guys, if you scholars, if you would go ahead and throw your questions in the chat for these two professionals, whatever you'd like to ask, and we're going to go through those shortly. Kayla, any comments on this?
Yeah, so I think from the perspective of, nonprofit, civic, you know, organizations,
Mhm.
our message sometimes is always going to be more transformative than the person that we're talking to, right? And sometimes we have to think about, I often say this around, we have a North Star vision, right? Whether or not that's a particular policy that we want passed, a particular initiative we want, resourced, et cetera. We have set a North Star as an organization. And so our messaging has to be authentic to our North Star, right? And so I think about two moments that have been like two different opportunities where I've seen this happen. One, we often see it with candidates. They send different mailers of different messages to different demographics. And
Mhm.
all the polling says that is a bad idea, because what people will see is that you're disingenuous, right? That if you say, over here, I think we should raise minimum wage to $15. And over here you say, well, I think I'd like to learn more about it, but I've not made a formal commitment. Then what that fuels is distrust, right? That you are not seen as a legitimate messenger. The other thing that we've seen is like how we shape polarizing language, right? And I think about 2020 and the rhetoric around defund the police. Everyone was like, "Oh, why would they say that? This is horrible. Like no one's going to buy into this, right?" But at its core, what we were saying was like re-envisioning public safety. That for too long, and in the past 2 decades, we have doubled and tripled police budgets, and we've not seen a decrease in crime. We've seen an increase in incarceration, and we're starving other sectors of our budget because we're over investing into something that's actually not proven to make people safer.
Mhm.
When we said defund the police, comma, because the polling shifted, right? People were like, defund the police, that's polarizing. We were like, we can't pay for affordable housing because we give the police too much money. They were like, well, I agree with that. I agree with that. And so the idea is, from my perspective, is like we're we're imagining something, we're building something that doesn't exist yet. So the words are going to rub up against people sometimes. But what are we building as folks who are responsible to message to bring people along, right? How are we bringing people along? And then you started to see all these graphics. Even Ben and Jerry's did one where they had this really big bowl of ice cream and they started scooping out pieces to say, this is what defund really means. It's just a redistribution of resources because there's a finite amount of money every community gets. And we have to balance the things that we know keep people safe, like housing, access to programs, social services, and the things that we've been investing in. We can acknowledge that, hey, maybe we put too much money in this category. We should shake that out a little bit and balance it out a little bit. That's what defund means. And every time we got the opportunity to explain that, people were like, I agree with this demand, right? And so what communication specialists saw and are often able to do is to say, this actually, the Green New Deal is polarizing. People don't know what that means. They're saying no carbon emission, no gas. That means coal workers are going to be put out. A communication specialist, what they do is say, here are the platforms and opportunities we can use to further educate folks into our message and bring them along with us. You don't change your message, you create more opportunities to educate folks on why you chose that message. And that's the kind of orientation we have to it.
Love that. Very well said. Really quick, how can communicators and brands support, um, this whole movement? How could they, what would you recommend to different brands and companies? What would you recommend they do to be more proactive regarding Black Lives Matter, social justice, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think what Eric said earlier is something that I resonate with a lot. That the kind of fast track is like Target is like, listen, we got a commitment to Black Lives Matter. We got this Black History T-shirt that we go put on the shelf. We're gonna have we're gonna give some money to like maybe they say we're gonna give some money to organization. Most time they say we're gonna put this T-shirt on the shelf, and that's gonna bring in more profit for us. But like we look like we're symbolically aligned. What I think about is solidarity has to look like more than just the benefit to the entity that's saying it, right? That if Black Lives Matter, we have to think about how to create pathways for more Black folks to get stock in our company, leadership in our company, decision making power in our company. And we have to think about our messages, right? That like there are some people, I think about one of the greatest PR campaigns of my lifetime is there were so many folks who said Bill Clinton is like the first Black president, right? Like it's polarizing. We don't have to talk about why they said that, but they said it. And what they felt when they said that was like, oh, you can come to the cookout, right? It was like there was a resonant in the messaging. There was a cultural affirmation that took place that they felt seen and validated in. And we have to think about from our perspectives, how are we affirming culture? How are we affirming the difference? How are we decentering ourselves? And how are we elevating others into these opportunities to strategize around the decisions that we end up making and to lead those initiatives and to just include those diversity and voices. I think that is that there are lots of opportunities for corporations. I don't know what it means to get it right, but like I think Ben and Jerry's is like the best corporation in this country, right? Because they're like, we'll put it on the line, right? Like we have made a commitment, and even if that commitment could hurt us, we're going to see that commitment through. And that level of accountability to a vision, I think, is how we start to is inspiring. I think other people should take note of that. Like what how can we use our brand in our politics? Like Colin Kaepernick just came out with an ice cream flavor, right? Like how do we leverage what we have to continue to show our commitment? That it's not just when the protests erupt. It's not just when the Target is set on fire in Minneapolis. It's 3 years later, it's 5 years later, it's 10 years later that there's an initiative that actually moves us beyond this moment so that it doesn't look disingenuous and like we're capitalizing on what's on the opportunity.
I love that. And yeah, the Ben and Jerry flavors were phenomenal. The different flavors. I thought that was super cool. It is 12:53. We have to be out of here by 1 or 1:05. Eric, really quick, any comments, any feedback off of what she just said? And then we are going to start our chat questions.
Sure, I'll be super, super quick. So what I'll say is that if I could be tactical for a minute, is just, we have to really move from the thinking that everything in our business to be like 100% about our business, and don't give our employees a space to just be human beings and live in the communities and serve the communities where they live. And so I would like to offer up a challenge that invite folks like Kayla's organization, invite different organizations to come in and educate your employees about what it is that they're working on, what are their movements, why have they picked those movements, and why are they passionate about, as well as what can they do to support their movement. And a lot of times is you make it easier because you want giving them another platform to talk to more people who they probably will not have access to in that intimate of a fashion. And another thing I'm gonna say is, like, don't just blankly write a check to give money to say you wrote a check and give money. Have some intentionality behind it as well. Have you looked at and see what you're giving to, and do you know what your investment is going to do? It's not an investment, how is your money going to further along an initiative or further along a program that an organization is doing? And then the last thing I'll say is volunteerism is still a real thing. And give your employees the autonomy to give like an hour or two of billable time a month to a cause or advance or working or volunteering their time or their expertise. A lot of nonprofits need accountants. A lot of nonprofits need forensic analysts. A lot of nonprofits need communication specialists. Different skill sets and talents that may exist. Your organization could be benefited greatly if they just allow some folks to really lend their skills and their expertise to really help lift and advance a nonprofits or action group's mission. And so I think those three things is, think about, bringing them in, talk, and having real conversations, people. Let's just not have this is what they do, this is who we are, but no, like, allow them to authentically engage with your employee base. So because that actually motivates your employee base to say, you know what, I'm really glad that my company thought enough of me to allow me to have this educational opportunity just to think about and learn about something that I don't see every day or that I don't feel every day. And that's really where we try to see the change happen.
Okay, thank you for that. Fantastic. Thank you for that, your wonderful comments, Eric. Okay, in the chat, our first question comes from Maurice Pierce, and he asked, can communication professionals make the sacrifices needed in order to promote change within our community? And either of you could take this.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you don't have to give up your job,
Right.
right? Like you don't have to give up the opportunity to to be stable yourselves. But I think about, um, that we all have the ability to be agitational from our perspective, like from our point of view and where we are. And you can raise questions and make recommendations, always understanding that your North Star is DEI, right? Your North Star is to bring as many people in as possible. So when you see something, you say something, right? It doesn't have to be public, external facing. It can say, hey, I really want us to live into our commitment to racial justice. I think we need to diversify the panelists here. I
Mhm.
really think, that like we're perpetuating a level of like gender essentialism. I think we need to have gender nonconforming and trans voices included. Hey, this actually looks really able, like everyone here is like able bodied. Who else can be included, right? And not like you're going down a checklist, but that you are serving as a filter, and as a moral compass for decisions that get made, that you can't, that where you can, right? And so I think that everyone can be an activist right where they are, right? Everyone can do that. And committing to doing that every time, I think is very powerful. Having someone, even in this space, having someone who's like not a formally trained communications person telling you how communications has helped my work, has grown our movements. That's a different perspective. And often different perspectives they're not included as a possibility. And
Mhm.
there's so much possible when we ask the question, who's missing, and how do we fix that? Like just those two questions, right? Who's missing? How do we fix that? At the table, on the panel, in the press statement, in the photograph, who's missing, and how do we fix that? That sort of self check is some of the deepest work that we can do, so that what we produce doesn't perpetuate the same problems that we know exist beyond us sometimes.
Yeah. I don't think
Thank
I'm
you for that.
only
Go
thing I'm
ahead,
gonna,
Eric.
yeah, the only thing I'm going to say to that, because Kayla did beautifully, like, is I'm just going to say, don't just bring a problem to the table, also bring a solution. It's easy to point out a diversity gap. It's easy to point out it's easy to point out gaps. Period. But take the extra step and think about what can be done to fix it, and bring both of that to the table.
I love that. Great words from the both of you. Thank you. Next question by Miss Nicole Andino. She asked, and thank you, Nicole, for placing all the links and Ben and Jerry links and article links into the chat. We do appreciate that. But Nicole asked, when applying for jobs, what advice do you have for people finding a company that prioritizes diverse inclusion in the workplace?
Ask the question. Ask, like, directly ask what, like, because just when you're applying for jobs, let's be very clear. You're interviewing the company just like they're interviewing you. Because you need to make sure that wherever you're interviewing, you're going to feel and be included, but also feel like this is a place you can stay and want to grow and want to work at. And so my advice is ask the company directly. So, like, diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to me. What are you doing in this space? And, like, what are some of the initiatives you have in place? What are some of the programs you have in place? How much of my time can I potentially invest to help advance the company forward in the space of DE&I? Ask the question. That should be one of your questions that you put in when they say, when I always say, do you have any questions for us? That's your question.
Very well said.
Yeah, we teach a compliment strategy sandwich to or affirmation sandwich. Like, hey, I've actually saw in recent years you all have taken up the mantle of thinking about diversity. I'm wondering X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
because I think that this is the right direction, and I'd love to support that. There, like your communication strategist, spin that thing. Don't make them feel rubbed. In the way that's like, oh, they saying we ain't got enough people up in here. I don't know if we want to bring that energy. But there's a way to say, like, I actually think you are, like, I want to be mission aligned with your mission. Like, so help me help that. And people are very receptive to affirmation. As just everyone in America is, right? Everyone likes to be affirmed. But then you also get to place, like, what is the, like, plan beyond, that rollout that I saw that's going to continue to, like, move that. And I think that that's an interesting way to, like, hold that line, and still get the job, because we want you to get the job.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Great comment, great feedback. Thank you to Danielle Turgis. She also placed an answer for Nicole's question to look at the CSR report, which stands for Corporate Stewardship Report. You could definitely find some information there as well to see what the company is doing and et cetera, et cetera. So definitely check out the great comment she placed in the chat. I believe that concludes our questions in the chat. Um, Eric and Kayla, if you don't mind typing in, how can we contact you? If any of the WVU or FAMU or FSU or TCC or Alabama State students or whoever, we have several universities with us today. Thank you, by the way, for swinging in for all of the university programs who joined in with us. How can they contact you guys? Is there an email? If you all would place something in the chat, maybe your even your Instagram or something, if they wanted to contact you guys and ask further questions or just connect with you, how could they connect with you?
Sure. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kayla.
I put my email and my handle in the chat. Feel free to send any questions or thoughts or just say hi.
Yep, same email as well as social media handles are in the chat as well. And then, also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on there as well. And happy to take more questions and even set up conversations with you as well, should you want that. But thank you so much for listening in and tuning in to us today.
Very cool. I see we do have one more question by Miss Kaya Clark. Hi, Kaya. Kaya is one of my former students, and so proud of her and the studies and work she's doing at WVU. She asked, "What is the work culture like?"
At MBooth, just overall.
I think she's saying both. If you
Yeah,
could answer both real quick, we're at 103.
I think she was
so-
saying that that's a good question to ask in the
Uh-huh.
interview about the job if you're thinking about it.
Mhm.
But yeah, you should also answer that.
Yeah, so work culture so industry overall, that agencies, you are going to come in a really competitive, highly competitive environment, but also very aspirational and very motivational when it comes to like putting forth the best talent forward and your best thinking forward. At MBooth, our culture, yeah, we are definitely about being inspired, but also about making sure that we are bringing our best and whole selves to the office the best way we can.
All right, thank you for answering that. And we are unfortunately, we are out of time. So thank you all. Thank you, Eric, for being here with us. Thank you, Kayla, for being here. I really appreciate everyone on behalf of WVU IMC program. We thank you. Special thanks to all of the guests. Special thanks to the faculty and directors who are signed in with us. Be sure to visit integrate.wvu.edu for upcoming sessions, recordings of previous episodes, and to subscribe to free updates. You could also find WVU online at WVU IMC. Thank you all for joining. This has been Ranata Hughes. Thank you.